Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about practical ways to develop emotional intelligence as a leader. This is something that comes up for our clients, and people don't always understand how this works and what tools and frameworks are out there to support your journey and help you improve your emotional intelligence. And this is something that Jackie has done a lot of work around. So we're going to be mining all of her knowledge around this in this episode. And the first place to start is to understand more about emotional intelligence. And there's a report you use alongside this work. So talk us through that. Tell us what that is. And then let's look at practical ways people can develop their emotional intelligence.
I love working with emotional intelligence. And the thing that I enjoy about this is that it can be a real game changer for leaders, because unlike personality psychometrics, which help with self-awareness and understanding yourself, fundamentally, your personality is not going to dramatically shift in a short time frame. Your personality is about your preferences rather than your potential. And so while it can be great to be aware of what those preferences are, there will be some natural strengths that come from that. And there might be some things that might be more challenging. And it can feel a bit like an uphill struggle because you're trying to change who you are. And that's never going to be easy or successful. So emotional intelligence, there's a few different models and frameworks out there. The one that I use is one that has a report with 15 different subscales that it reports back on. And it's all about how you use and understand and interpret your own emotions and others' emotions. And that can contribute to lots of different things beyond leadership. So it can contribute to better relationships. It can contribute to how you interact with people generally in life. But in my leadership work, it's really valuable to help people not just have the self-awareness and self-insight, but then to build by using some of the strategies that we'll share to actively choose strategies that will enable them to be more successful in work situations where emotions come into play in one form or another.
Yeah, and I think it's really good that you split that out with the personality and the emotional intelligence, because I think a lot of the time people can think that they're part of the same thing. And like you say, they're absolutely not. So before we get into the practical ways that people can develop their emotional intelligence, let me ask you, first of all, what you see as the challenges, because I'm thinking in my mind what the challenges that I know my clients face and that I've faced throughout my own career and improve my own emotional intelligence. So what do you see as the main challenges there?
One of the challenges can be, because there's so much complexity and so many different things that form a part of the overall model of emotional intelligence, understanding where to prioritize and where to actively start with developing your own emotional intelligence can be a real challenge. It can feel overwhelming. If you read a lot of the literature, okay, there's all these different things that form part of it. So where do I actually start?
Yeah, and I think that is the thing, isn't it, with this, because you think, this is something that I would like to know more about. But then when you start Googling it and looking into it, you can go, oh my goodness, there's so much information out there. And I know the way that you break it down, you're absolutely the queen of simplification, and you've broken it down. So you've got 5 key elements that make this up so that people can figure out which element they relate to. So talk us through the first one.
So, first of all, these are part of the actual model that I work with. I do find them really helpful to chunk up from the 15 subscales to the 5 key areas. Those 5 areas in brief are self-perception, so how you perceive yourself, self-expression, so how do you then show up in the world? Then you've got interpersonal, which is about how you relate and interact with other people. Then you've got decision making, so how well you're able to use your emotions to make good decisions and solve problems, or how well you're able to make good decisions and solve problems when emotions are working against that being easy. And then finally, stress management. So how able are you to be resilient and to stay positive even when you are placed under stress, which is inevitable in life, never mind in workplaces. So those are the 5 key areas. And I think as people hear those, you'll naturally recognize that they flow from one into each other. How well you know and manage yourself flows into how do you express yourself? How do you show up in the world? Then how you show up in the world will impact on the interpersonal element and how well you interact with others. They all have that complexity and flow from one into the other, but often there will be one of those 5 that people can identify as, if there's something that I need to do, where do I make a start? And very often it's in the self-perception area. It's in that, how do I see myself? Where is my level of self-belief and self-confidence? How do I manage myself at times when emotions come to the fore in my life and workplace?
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk through the different areas there, you can really see how they build on to each other. And I think that's the key thing with this. It's like starting small. Because I remember years ago when I found out about emotional intelligence, I was like, what is it? I'm so interested. And at that time, being a brand new leader, there were so many emotions involved. And it was like, you need to suppress those emotions if you're going to be successful as a leader. And it's like trying to work out, who am I? And it took me ages to figure out who I am or who I was at that time. And I think that where you're talking about that self-perception and self-expression, it's really key, isn't it, to the process?
And I think very often it's interesting that you were told to suppress your emotions, and you will definitely not be the only leader that has heard that or feels that they should do that. And what I love about emotional intelligence is there's not a suggestion that you suppress your emotions. What it suggests is that there will be behavioral and social strategies that will allow you to work with your emotions. So it's not about suppressing them. It's about acknowledging and understanding, where are they coming from? Why am I feeling them? And then having strategies where, if they would naturally lead to you doing something that will be counterproductive, you have a way of creating that pause. And it's the way I describe it to people, it's about learning to respond rather than react to the emotions that you feel. So it's choosing behavioral approaches that will get you the result that you want and need, as opposed to being completely driven by the emotion that you're feeling in the moment. And we'll all have times in our life where we've regretted the way that we've reacted to something and then had to live with the consequences. So if you can learn to not experience those emotions, not suppress them, but to recognize when they help you and when they hinder, and to have the strategies at times where they might hinder to be able to respond rather than to react, that's when you're developing your emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I think that's the absolute key point, isn't it? It's about responding rather than reacting. It's not about suppressing anything. It's about taking in what is being said or the situation that you're in and almost observing how that affects you. So rather than just reacting because you feel hurt, you feel shame, you feel stupid, or it could be any of the other positive emotions as well. Usually what I found is I was ready to react when I felt shame, if I felt humiliated, if I felt like I'd dropped a ball, and I was just constantly on that high alert, like ready to react, ready to defend myself. And I think You're absolutely right, because when I switch that around to responding rather than reacting, and to think about how those things hit me, and sometimes I would say, thank you for that information, or thank you for that update. I will come back to you. Sometimes I'd be in the toilet having a little bit of a cry, but I would take myself out of that situation and respond in a way that was logical, that almost took the emotion out of it, but didn't suppress the emotion. I allowed myself to feel all of that and then was able to respond. I think sometimes you can't always do that in the moment. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, completely agree. And I find it really interesting because very often my clients are trying to work on things like the interpersonal element and their relationships with other people at work, where they find relationships challenging, where they feel that people are unfair or unjust to them, where they feel criticized, or where they've got a more challenging relationship. They have issues managing their stress at work. When we do the emotional intelligence report and look at it, the real opportunity is in that self-perception and building their sense of self-belief. What really struck me when you were talking was that phrase, talked of almost being an observer of yourself. I remember when I trained in coaching, my trainer talked about the role of coaching is to allow someone to become a compassionate observer of themselves. And I think people don't do that enough. When they step out and try and look in, they will often judge or criticize or blame themselves, and that heightens the emotions. When you can start to detach and look in and be compassionate when you observe yourself and the situation, you don't have to ask yourself to be perfect every time. Sometimes you'll choose a response rather than react, and that response won't get you the outcome that you wanted. Beating yourself up about it builds frustration and depletes that self-perception. So that's not a helpful strategy. And yet so many people will carry that inner voice of criticism, knocking their own self-belief consistently, as opposed to building it. So yeah, that in particular for me really stood out from what you were describing. And it's something that I really want people to reflect on and understand, is that self-perception piece is so fundamental to building your emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I think that is absolutely it, isn't it? It is that self-perception piece. Like, it's super important. Okay, so we've talked about the 5 higher level areas. If we're thinking about developing our emotional intelligence or our EQ, where do people start?
So what I would say, first of all, we're going to share 12 strategies to develop your EQ. But where I would start is from those 5 higher areas. Pick one that you recognize could benefit. If it's not self-perception, if you feel like your self-belief is okay, but it's maybe one of the other areas, then pick out the strategies that sit under that area. Really hone in on the strategies that would give you the most growth in your emotional intelligence. That's where I would say to start.
Okay, let's move on to talking about the 12 practical ways that you can develop your emotional intelligence. We're not suggesting by any means that you start to implement all of these things, because it would just be too much. And don't worry about running to get a notepad and a pen right now. We'll make sure that the download is in the show notes so that you've got it and you can use it as a tick list. But I think the key thing about this is to just pick out a couple of things at a time, work on them, work through them, evaluate, and then move on to the next. So let's go through them and you can tell us more about them and what you actually need to do in order to develop that particular element.
So for each of those 5 key areas we've talked about, I've got 2 or 3 practical ways that you can start to work on that. Under self-perception, we have self-regard. This is about how you see yourself. And the approach there is to consciously acknowledge your own contributions to team successes. And the reason that this is really powerful is that I think people often hesitate to acknowledge, and you'll see this with interview prep, where people will talk about we and having worked as part of a team, and they'll find it easy to acknowledge team successes, but they find it much harder to acknowledge their own contribution to overall team successes. Not in a braggy way, you don't have to go telling other people how you've contributed to it, but to just note and start to acknowledge, what have you done in the last 12 months? What are you doing right now that is your contribution to the team success, can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? What is your contribution? And if you're sat there thinking, I'm not sure what my contribution is, this is where you need to dig a little bit deeper, because ultimately the role that you're undertaking is allowing the other people to excel and to achieve under your leadership. So I think it's key. And especially, I always go back to interview prep, don't I? And you're absolutely right. People find it so hard to articulate, but if you can nail that element, really lean into what you do and the contributions you make, I think that will really help within your job, but also when it comes to interviews and to progress within your career. So what's the next area?
So there's a couple of others sitting under self-perception. One is self-actualization, which sounds very high and grand, but the approach here is to just identify one skill that fits within your long-term career aims and commit to developing that skill through your current role. This is about creating some sense of meaning and purpose. And I know for both of us, we have worked with quite a number of clients, especially in the last 12 to 18 months, where people get to a stage of, is this it with my career? Whereas if you're thinking about what do I want in the future and what skill could I develop that might help me, then some of what you're doing day to day is linked to that future goal. And then the third one, sitting under self-perception, is around your emotional self-awareness. Keep an emotions journal. Each day, identify some emotions that you've experienced and the things that triggered them. And what that does is just draws your awareness to some of the patterns. It draws you to consciously notice who or what triggers both positive and negative emotions. And that awareness can be really helpful to understand what are those patterns, what is it that is the bigger picture of the emotions that you're experiencing. You can consciously create more of the positive triggers, but you can also consider how might you avoid or diminish the impact of some of the negative triggers.
Yeah, I love that. I still keep an emotions journal now. I'm always thinking when something affects me or when something makes me feel something, I'm like, what is that? And I suppose because I'm coaching on a daily basis and because I'm always self-coaching, it's easier. But I also think it's a habit as well, a habit that you've got to commit to. If you commit to it and create that habit, you can use that as a way to grow and to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So next up, we've got the self-expression area. There are 3 things under here that you can do. One is within emotional expression to make conscious choices about how and when to express your emotions. You can ask yourself, is this the right time and place to express an emotion? And also, how might this affect others? This is helpful if your expression of emotion might impact others. It's not saying don't feel the emotion, don't experience it. It's saying, how can you consciously be aware of how your expression of emotion might have an impact, and to do that in the right context, in the right time and place. So with the right people at the right time and in the right way. So the next under self-expression is around assertiveness. And this can be particularly challenging, but really helpful if you have had feedback that you are too nice or that you need to be more challenging, or that you're not assertive enough. And this is to just challenge yourself to be clear about when you disagree with suggestions, ideas, or proposals. Be willing to hold a different view without trying to convince others it's the right one. So I think sometimes people feel like if I'm going to express a different view, I've got to be able to almost justify it, and I've got to try and convince people round to my way of thinking. And the aim with this is to just practice that skill of expressing your view without trying to convince other people to come round to your perspective. And then finally, we've got independence. So this is make a habit of forming your own opinion before you seek other people's input or ask for advice. If people struggle for their confidence, they might naturally start to ask other people for advice or input, and that can then become quite overwhelming and make it difficult to make decisions. So this is not saying don't seek guidance or advice. It's saying if you know that you tend to lack the conviction in your own view, almost form that first and then sense check it against opinions or advice from trusted advisors.
Yeah, I think that was a big one for me in my early career, because I was prone to allowing other people's opinions to almost become my opinions, and it never really sat right, and I couldn't ever really put my finger on it. But when I started going, right, what do I actually think about this situation? What is my opinion of this? And then looking at what else is out there, that really made a difference. But it is a habit. All of this is very much about creating those habits, isn't it? It's about listening to yourself and really looking inside. So what's the next one then?
So our next area is interpersonal. And we've got two approaches under here. One is consciously seeking common ground and connection, especially with people that you don't naturally gel with. Sometimes people will naturally click with people and not click with others. That's completely normal. But what can be really helpful is to find some ways of seeking some of that common ground and that ability to interact with people who you might not naturally lean towards. I've seen this play out with such interesting results because very often they find more common ground than they expected.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I am one of those people that's okay, we need to find some common ground. So let's talk about the weather, holidays, and you go through all of these small talk questions to try and find that common ground. But then when you switch that around and become interested in that person rather than just pinging out questions, that's where you'll get more from them. You'll find out more about them, and then you can really find that common ground. And as you say, it's always surprising to see what you have in common, even if you feel worlds apart. There's always something, isn't there?
Yeah. And that one's about dialing up your empathy. So seeking connection and finding things in common. On the flip side, there can be a real interesting one that I find with clients where empathy is often either a real high score on their emotional intelligence report or relatively low. The flip side is to really think about how you perceive other people. People rate themselves quite strongly for empathy, but sometimes that's not really empathy. Sometimes it's them projecting what they would feel in that same situation, rather than using that curiosity and really understanding what's that other person thinking or feeling. Sometimes what they believe is empathy is actually them projecting how they would experience that situation rather than having curiosity about how someone else is experiencing that situation. So this is about taking that perspective of asking questions before you assume you understand someone else's feelings or emotions.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key skills you learn as a coach and in different leadership roles. As soon as you start clarifying what is going on with that person and you're not projecting your own emotions onto them, because I think sometimes you can go, oh my goodness, if I was in that situation, this is what I'd feel like. So therefore that person must be feeling like this too. And then you treat them in that way. And then you find out later on that actually they didn't really feel like that. By asking those questions and really understanding it, I think that's where you can really develop your own skills there, but also increase the level of empathy as a leader.
And I find this one really interesting because I have a close family member who would consider themselves really empathetic. I'm mindful of what information I share with them because they seem to feel other people's pain and feel like, oh, I'm being really empathetic. And then I get sympathy. And I don't want to tell you anything negative because you're making it bigger than it feels to me. Then I feel like I'm making you feel this pain by telling you something that is not that big of a deal to me, but you're feeling it more. I think it's interesting for people to examine how they experience empathy and how they demonstrate empathy. And I do think it's quite a gender trait. I think it's quite a female trait as well, to feel like you're being really empathetic when sometimes you're projecting.
Yeah, and it can be really difficult to understand the difference and act accordingly. And I think the only way that you're ever really going to get under the skin of it is to really break it down and to almost question yourself, like, was I empathetic in that situation, or was I super sympathetic? There's obviously a clear difference there, and it's making sure that you're questioning and reflecting. The more you do that, the more you get into the habit of doing that, then you will be able to work on that level of empathy and help people feel at ease. You totally understand how they're feeling, and then you can help them and support them in overcoming whatever it is that is bothering them, or just generally what they need support with.
Not be that's the thing. If you ask that question, it seems like you might be feeling this, or how do you feel about that? You'll get often a sense check of how that person truly feels. And that, as opposed to an assumption, is really powerful. So yeah, really simple one. But particularly if you recognize some of that, oh yeah, actually that could be me. I could be the person that feels like I'm empathetic, but actually what I'm doing is assuming they feel the way that I would. Then that can be a really powerful way to shift your emotional intelligence. So moving on then, we've got our decision making, and there's a couple of aspects within this that people can do. One is to spend longer in problem solving, which is part of the decision making composite. You've got problem solving as a subscale, and within that, you can really emphasize, before jumping to solutions, spending longer really defining the problem and asking what exactly is the issue that we're trying to solve. And this is really powerful for yourself, but it's also really powerful as a leader in that when you ask that question, you create shared understanding, because sometimes trying to make a good decision when people are actually trying to solve different problems with the solutions that they're suggesting or with the ideas that they're bringing, if you're really clear on what the actual problem is, it becomes much easier to know which solution fits best. So yeah, just spending longer on problem definition rather than jumping straight to solutions. And then the second aspect under the decision-making area is reality testing. This is about consciously seeking more diverse perspectives and asking yourself that question of, what assumptions am I making about this situation? And again, that can be quite tricky to do in the moment, but it can be really powerful to start to notice and understand your own assumptions. So similar to the journaling on emotions, if you start to just prompt yourself to notice what assumptions you're making about different people, different situations, different problems, and then thinking about more diversity in terms of thinking perspectives, then that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now about a manager that I had who used to say to us, don't come to me with problems, come with solutions. A lot of the time, we didn't always really understand what the problem was. So much pressure to come up with solutions that actually some things would be missed, and the solutions were not always fit for purpose because there was that real pressure to jump to the solutions. I think this is key, something that you can use yourself, but also something that you encourage your team to do, to make sure that before they start running for solutions, even if it's critical, it's what is your understanding of this problem? And you're absolutely right with the reality testing, because it's like, what is the problem, but also what assumptions am I making? Because there's always lots of assumptions that happen that could derail different things or prevent a solution from moving forward. So I think that is one thing I learned the hard way. You need to understand the problem first before you dive into the solution, and then it makes the solution finding so much easier.
Which leads into stress management, because if you're in that situation where your decision making is not good, then you create unnecessary stress for yourself. So if you are affected by other people's decision making rather than your own, and you need strategies that can support stress management, there's a couple of things here. One is to develop adaptive thinking. When faced with challenges or changes, allow yourself to notice and feel the emotions associated, which can be that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach or the frustration, but then ask yourself some questions that start to move you from that emotion to that kind of place of starting to move forward and out of sitting in that emotion. Some questions might be, okay, what's different now? What new opportunities could this present? How could we adjust our approach? It's those questions that acknowledge the situation might be frustrating or successful, but how can we best manage with the situation as it is? Or how can we adopt this change and make it as successful as possible? So you're not trying to ignore the emotion that is coming from kind of change or challenge, but you're trying to work with and then bring yourself through it. So asking yourself some of those questions can be really helpful. And around optimism, it's also key to have some real balance. So there is nothing worse than that kind of sense of everything's got to be shiny and we've all got to pretend that we don't know that things are feeling pretty crappy right now. It can be starting to have some of that balanced and more realistic optimism. Questions like, what's working well despite some of these challenges that we're facing? Or what can we learn from this situation? Or how can we use this to improve or to grow? They acknowledge that the situation isn't how you want it, but they can also acknowledge and let your brain know that there can be and sometimes are some positives. Not trying to be all shiny, clappy, hurrah, and ignore, but to work with and work through emotions when things are feeling stressful.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense, doesn't it? So is there anything else that you would add to all of that, especially if somebody is thinking that emotional intelligence is a key focus for them right now?
I think going back to what we said earlier, really identify where can you get most bang for your buck in terms of developing your emotional intelligence? What would be most beneficial for you to develop based on the situation that you're in and what you're aspiring to? And just start small. Do not try and do everything all at once. Just pick one or two of those approaches that we've suggested. Make that consistent, make it a habit, keep the download that we'll provide in the show notes as a reference. And then once you've got one licked, you can come back to the next.
So if this is something you want to work on and it's something that is going to become a priority, I suggest having a conversation with Jackie about the EQ work that she does and the reports that you can do and the feedback sessions that Jackie can also provide, because I think sometimes working through the different elements is great, but if you want to make it your key focus, then spending some time with Jackie, who can help you figure out these thoughts and put action plans together, will help you move forward faster. So get in touch with Jackie if that is something that you're thinking of at the moment. And if it's something your teams could benefit from, get in touch, because there's different workshops that we can run for your teams to help them understand emotional intelligence and work better together as a team. As usual, thank you for listening, and don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. We'll be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com /Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.